ourselves in the conversations. I think we just started recording, so I don't know if I should start again. I just want to check with our administrators. Should I start?
Please continue, sir. Please continue.
All right, I should just continue. Okay. So just for the record, for those who may have missed this, this is a program of the Regenesis Law School, in which we are running a series of webinars on topical areas, whether they are in the legislature or they are in the community. We want to bring the law to the people. And of course, today, as indicated, the topic is Muslim Marriages Bill. How does it affect me? There is a diverse religious population in South Africa. You know, people are Muslim, they are Christian, they are Hindu, they practice customary practices and so forth. And all those, you will recall, are recognized fully by the Constitution of the Republic. So now there is obviously a healthy contestation, as it were, between the value systems. But truth be told, I say without equivocation that South Africa is probably one of the best places to practice one's religious preference, because there's really not a lot of interference on a day-to-day basis. But now there is a Muslim Marriages Bill. And of course, we have some very exciting experts and people in the know to discuss this with us. Of course, I am the host as academic head of the Regenesis Law School. Now, my esteemed co-host is he needs no introduction. He is a law lecturer at Regenesis School of Law, a practicing advocate with Dumanokwe Group. And of course, he's a former professor of law at Northwest University, holds a doctorate in law, has a number of consulting and litigating experience, and of course, former student leader, and he holds and has published quite extensively. That is Advocate Ilya Mwanawina, and I'd ask him to raise his hand or give a shout out of some sort, so that you can see him. There he is, smiling.
Thank you very much.
And then, of course,
the screen won't switch.
Yes, he will be co-piloting this with me, fully running the webinar with me. And then, of course, I don't know if I saw Ms. Rumana Mohammed is here. I don't know if she's.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Oh, she's here. Okay. Oh, she's here. Okay, that's fine. And she's an attorney, and of course, fiduciary practitioner at Rumana Mohammed Attorneys. And of course, she has a number of areas of expertise that span estate planning, wills and trusts, insolvent estates, Muslim marriages, which is what we're speaking about today, divorce law. She provides training, workshops, and presentations, and litigates. And then we have the pleasure again to, on top of Ms. Mohammed, who is really right in the thick of this whole discussion, we have Mr. Faisal Sayed, he wants it to be known that he is studying his LLB with the Regenesis Law School. But of course, he's quite an established journalist. And of course, he's host of the Faisal Sayed television show, director of Faisal Sayed Investments. He's been secretary of the Muslim Judicial Council, Burial Administration, and of course, board chairman, Muslim Cemetery Board, among other issues. And of course, he's quite passionate about this. I can confirm, as someone who's been teaching them family law, that this is something that has been a very big topic as well. I don't know if any of our other panelists are already here. I can't seem to
I'm here, Advocate Kevin.
I'm just checking. Oh, yes. Yes, you are here. Please put your camera on, Dr. Dr. Munir, please guide us on how to properly pronounce your name, because we don't want to
Thanks, yeah, for that. Yeah, I'm Munir Abdur Auf. Munir Abdur Auf, yeah.
Thank you,
thanks.
thank you. Thank you,
Yeah,
Doctor.
thanks. I'm basically currently in Limpopo, so therefore I'm putting my camera off because it's the network connection is not that great here.
No, that's fine.
At the moment, yeah. Thank you.
We're just excited to have you. And he's doctor. He's a law lecturer at the University of the Western Cape, Department of Criminal Justice and Procedure. He's also an admitted attorney and sworn translator of the High Court of South Africa. He's also a marriage officer with the Department of Home Affairs. And Dr. Munir Abdurrauf is a CRL rights commissioner as well. And in my past life, as Deputy Power Protector, I used to deal a lot with the CRL as a fellow Chapter 9 institution. And the CRL Commission, as you know, is a Chapter 9 institution. And he has obtained an LLD degree, an LLM, an LLB, and a diploma in Arab linguistics during his academic career. So this is not going to be boring in one way or another. This is exciting stuff. And of course, Ms. Camilla Paulse, we're saving the best for last. She's an attorney and director at Harold Guy Attorneys in Cape Town, and she has over 21 years experience and practices in various areas of law, specializing in access to children, anti-nuptial contracts, divorce, family law, maintenance, and matrimonial law. So I think that should be our entire panel. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin.
Just to be sure. Did I get your profile right, ma'am?
It's Carmela Paulse, that's correct, and Harold Guy Attorneys in Cape Town.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is a topical issue, I think very exciting. There's such a pluralist in this pluralistic society. One of our aims is to tear down ignorance. You know, very important that we shatter stereotypes and ignorance and foolishness that comes with not knowing how other communities and societies live. And this is why we're having this webinar and ensuring that people know the law, they know how things work. And especially, I personally have very great fascination with Islam. I'm a Christian, but I have great fascination with Islam. I have a Quran. Faisal knows that. I've shown him my Quran, and of course, I love the food. I love everything, you know. So it's really one of those things that you never lose from learning how to be diverse in your thinking. So, but I don't know who's going to start in the first question. The elephant in the room. What is the Muslim Marriages Bill? Right? And what changes would it bring into effect? I don't know who's going to take this. Who's going to start? Anyone?
Maybe I could start, Advocate.
Dr. Munir, yes?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the question of the Muslim Marriages Bill, I think, is a very broad question, because there was something in the past referred to as the Islamic Marriage Bill many decades back, and thereafter the Muslim Marriages Bill 2003 that was drafted by a project committee, and later on there was a Muslim Marriages Bill 2010. That's another piece of proposed legislation. And now recently, there has been some movement by the Al Jama'ah party, and they also referring to their piece of proposed legislation for the registration of Muslim marriages as a Muslim Marriages Bill, or private members bill, as far as introducing it to Parliament. Yeah, so I would say that what all of these pieces of proposed legislation have in common is that they want to introduce something into law, right, signed into law by the president ultimately, that recognizes and regulates marriages concluded in terms of Islamic law, would be Muslim marriages, in terms of Islamic law practices, and not necessarily what is currently available to all South African citizens in terms of the Marriage Act and the Civil Union Act, the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, and so forth. Yeah, so that's my initial comments. Thank you.
So Dr. Munier, would you say that the changes are radical, or are they merely codifying what has always been in existence?
I would say that the changes would be giving effect to what the South African Constitution allows for in terms of Section 15.3, where there's nothing that prevents the South African government from enacting legislation that recognizes Muslim or basically personal laws, or in this instance is Muslim personal law, the Muslim Marriages Bill. So there would be some differences, as nuances, as we find in different religious communities, and we have different cultures. So there would definitely be some differences, and those differences should obviously also, in order to pass into law, it has to meet the South African law requirements as far as the Constitution is concerned. So yes, I would say there are some changes that would be required, and therefore, if there was no differences, then all Muslims would have married in terms of the Marriage Act that is available currently.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if there are any other. Thank you, sir, Dr. Munier. Any other takers? Camilla, Romana, Camilla, your hand is up.
Hello, thank you for that, Dr. Munir Abdul-Ouf. He is correct that there's been a lot of bills over the years. The previous bill that went to the ConCourt got biffed at the ConCourt, and they were told no direct access, start the process all over again. So there have been a lot of attempts over the years to try and recognize Muslim marriages. And in 2014, the Women's Legal Center went back to the Western Cape High Court with 2 cases that they've combined and got recognition through a judgment by Judge Dennis Davis, and I've now forgotten the other 2 judges. But that case went off to the Supreme Court of Appeal. There were cross appeals and all sorts of appeals, and then that decision went off to the ConCourt. And the ConCourt on the 28th of June 2022 recognized Muslim marriages. So that's our starting point, right? And the ConCourt said the legislature has 24 months to enact this legislation. So there's been a lot of work done over the years, but it hasn't gotten, the legislature has been given due dates by the courts, and they've lapsed, they've come and gone. So now what we have is a situation, and the ConCourt's decision and the Western Cape's decision and the FCA's decision is very different, right? They've said we recognize Muslim marriages from the state. In fact, they went as far as saying retrospective effect from the date that the Women's Legal Center initiated the process, which was in December of 2014. Let me just make sure, the 15th of December 2014, right? So now we have 24 months to bring a piece of legislation into effect to register, to recognize Muslim marriages. And Dr. Abdul-Ouf is correct. A minority party has presented a draft bill to Parliament, to the committee for consideration. But the Department of Home Affairs has also presented and is working on what they call the omnibus bill. And this is to recognize all marriages in one comprehensive bill. And what happened at this committee meeting, when the minority party presented this bill, was the Department of Home Affairs and the minister said, let's get together and let's see how we can work together to incorporate. The most important thing that we need to do is to regulate the Muslim marriages, right? We need to be able to work out a system as how is this going to work in practice for us? All we have is a Concord decision that has radically changed the law. And so it's not, so at the moment where we are is a situation where the minority party, being the Al Jamaa party, and the Department of Home Affairs are going to work together to try and make sure that all the regulations in what they refer to as the private members bill or the registration of Muslim marriages can work together, and it can incorporate all those components.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's Rumana, do you have any? Thank you, Kamala. Do you, Rumana, you have any?
The pleasure.
I think the previous speaker summed it up really nicely. If I add, I think very importantly is to clarify that there is no legislation in place at the moment. And so when your question asks, what is the Muslim Marriages Bill and how does it impact on us? And there's almost an insinuation that it is legislation, but it isn't. All we are working with are court decisions. So court cases, that is generally, we know, with decisions from the courts, yes, there's positive impact, but it's piecemeal relief. It's ad hoc decisions. Okay, so what the Muslim community and communities who are trying to have religious marriages recognized, but what the lobbyists are trying to achieve is to have legislation in place, which I want to clarify is not in place because a bill is a draft document. It is not enforced legislation, right? So the lobbyists are asking for legislation that not only recognizes Muslim marriages, but also regulates it, which is why the initiatives from the time that Dullah Umar, the late Dullah Umar, initiated in 1994, those initiatives were working towards the regulation, not only the recognition, because Islamic law, by nature, is a complex legal system. And you can't just sort of recognize a Muslim marriage without having some sort of regulation of that marriage, because there's going to be chaos. And I think for me, or for myself and my contemporaries, just a single recognition doesn't go far enough.
All right. No, thank you very much. I don't know if there's any other input at this stage, but there's quite a lot to go through. Yes, Faisal?
Advocate, thank you for the opportunity, and to the rest of the panelists and to the audience watching. I just have a very small input on this, but just on a lighter note, starting off that, you know, when the law school announced this particular webinar, my brother called me and said that the title is the Muslim Marriage Bill, and what does it mean to you? Because you're not married. And I said that perhaps I should create the unmarried bill. And he then said to me that but you don't get bills when you're unmarried. So I just wanted to just start with, on a lighter note. But also touching on, last night I was in consultation with some legal persons, and they were just pushing me through some information. And I just want to reiterate what the other two colleagues had mentioned, and that is that the omnibus bill is already a white paper and has already been submitted. And the key focus obviously is that this might repeal all the other acts, and that this model, from what was explained last night, should have sort of different doors for Muslims, Hindus, and everyone else to walk through. And effectively that the latest bill being the one from the Al Juma party is a private member's bill. And I just, at this point, want to say that I think that as South Africans and as Muslim South Africans, there has been a time that we felt that, yes, and I'm not married, and I've clarified that, but understanding the social context of these issues, that we were being ignored for a long time and that we might not be part of the new dispensation, because back in the day, Nelson Mandela had visited the Athlone Civic Center, and he at that point said that the Constitution itself will not only reflect one religion or a specific religion, but be all-encompassing, and that we were all Black. So I think the Muslim Marriages Bill, for me as an individual and as a law student sitting at all of your feet today, is something that would perhaps take the broader recognition of Islam and Muslims and put it within that space of acceptance. So I see it from that perspective.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And on that note, I think, Faisal, maybe you can start. The next question would be, you know, what are the main changes that the bill will bring into effect?
Advocate, I think I would rather leave that for our jurists, but
Okay.
if it was just
For
in the
from
summary
your
line,
even a layman's idea.
it's just in the summary line. I think that the recognition of the nikah itself, the registration of Muslim marriages through the recent Concord judgment that gives recognition of Muslim marriages, it found that there were provisions in the Divorce Act and the Marriage Act that were inconsistent with the Constitution. And then, as our former colleague had said, that Parliament was given 24 months to develop legislation for the regulation of Muslim marriages. So it is to develop the law to regulate Muslim marriages. I think we have until June 2024, I stand under correction, to get that. But I think importantly, it is the recognition of Muslim marriages and the nikah itself.
Yes. No, thank you very much. So I'm putting the question back to the panel, and I will sort of merge two questions that you may have received in your brief, and say, look, what are the main changes that this brings into effect, and how does it relate to Sharia law, and what is Sharia law? So if you can just maybe weave your way through that muddy sort of question that I've just given to you, and just even for the unschooled, for the lay person who sees all this stuff and, you know, sees it on television, on newspapers, what is it, Dr. Munir? What are the changes, and of course, how does it relate to what we call Sharia law? Are we even correct to call it Sharia law? What should we be saying correctly? So it's also a tool for people to know how to say things the correct way, and understand how the Muslim society works in the context of South Africa.
Yeah, thanks for that, Advocate. Just as a from contextual approach, we're looking at, if we're speaking of the Muslim Marriages Bill, it seems to be as if we're referring to standalone legislation, as was basically the position up to basically 2001, 2003, the Islamic Marriages Bill, the Muslim Marriages Bill 2003, Muslim Marriages Bill 2010, and now the recent submission by the political party. The other possibilities that has basically been introduced into the South African context is basically something referred to as a single marriage statute, which doesn't really feature anything referred to as a Muslim Marriages Bill, because that is more of recognition without regulation, and that wasn't really the best approach. And the Department of Home Affairs then produced a green paper. And therein they said that, look here, even though this is what the project committee said, that we go the single marriage statute route, we also still looking into the possibility of either single marriage statute or standalone legislation, or the omnibus approach, which is currently what they're looking at more or less. And that is basically where we have one piece of legislation that then incorporates different chapters into the one act of parliament, but each chapter would then regulate and recognize different religions, cultures, and so forth. Right. There has not yet, as to date, been any actual legislation or proposed legislation that has come out for public comment. I believe Home Affairs is working on something, but I haven't seen it as yet. So speaking of the term Muslim Marriages Bill, it gives me the understanding that we are speaking of a standalone legislation, and keeping in mind also that there is also the possibility of the single marriage statute and also the omnibus approach, which seems to be more or less what the Department of Home Affairs is looking at. In that instance, if there is a specific chapter dedicated to Muslim marriages, I would say yes, that is where Sharia law would then feature, and where the Muslim community should at least give input as far as that bill's process is concerned to becoming an act. Thank you. Am I still here?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. Any other takers on this one? Thank you, Dr. Munir. Romana?
I think Kamila's been
Hands up.
wanting to say something for a while, so maybe Kamila should go first.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
Go
fine.
ahead,
I couldn't
Romana,
see the
you
hand.
on air. I'll go next.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Romana, you can go ahead.
Okay, so you know, your question's obviously quite loaded.
Yes.
I also want to sort of just sort of place on record. You constantly mention Muslim Marriages Bill, but as a point of clarity, I think it's incorrect to be commenting on a Muslim Marriages Bill, because the question in my mind would be, which one are you referring to? So if you ask me,
yes.
what changes would the bill bring, then I'm going to ask, which bill are you referring to, and why would I comment on a draft document? You know, the government hasn't even decided what it wants to do, and here we are speculating about different pieces of legislation, which is quite exhausting. I mean, I've been involved in this since 1994, and I'm exhausted. At this point, I'm saying, government hasn't had the political will to legislate on this particular topic. Every time it was we were near election time, suddenly this issue of Muslim marriages would come up, and you know, to rally support, there'd be the sudden energy, and then it would fall flat immediately thereafter. So I'm actually quite frustrated by this whole process, and I'm now sitting in my chair and I'm saying, okay, I'm just going to help those who are struggling due to the non-recognition. And then when government eventually gets its act together, I will then respond to what is presented. So I'm a bit uncomfortable to speak about what this bill, and I'm not sure which bill you're referring to.
Yes,
the
last version that I
text.
saw was dated 2022.
Yeah, but we can't even speak about that because that hasn't even moved. And now there's this whole omnibus bill and the Single Marriage Act and something that Al-Jamaa is proposing, but none of that for me, in terms of the work that I do, none of that is certain. And this forum should be talking about what is certain. If you want to say, okay, what would the recognition and regulation of Muslim marriages do for Muslim women and children, and you know, then yes, we can have a discussion at that level. But to refer to a draft piece of legislation, I'm not comfortable to commit my comments to that. So that's my one point.
Thanks, Romana. Actually, you are raising a very nice angle to that discussion, because you're schooling us to say, look, for those of us who are viewing this as outsiders, who all along have been assuming that there's a bill there's something to work with, that in actual fact, there isn't, that there's a problem even with that. So I'm very happy with the narrative that you're bringing out, because it also opens up the conversation, because people out there and classrooms teaching family law and textbooks have given that narrative that there is a bill. So it's important that we are schooled and we and we get more clarity on these things. And that's why we have actually brought you. We have brought you for that specific reason.
Well, thank you. Then the second point is around, how would legislation, then I'm going to say, sort of amend your question, how would legislation then impact on the South African family law landscape? And yes, we will then not have such ad hoc pieces of law through the courts and piecemeal relief. We're not going to have to go through the costly and emotionally draining processes of first approaching the court to say, here I exist, I'm legitimate. So, because it's a two-step process for families right now. You first have to approach the court to justify that your relationship and the children born of this marriage are legitimate and legal and recognized, and not through legislation, but through the Constitution, okay? And then the next step would be to ask the court for the relief in your circumstances. Now, that's costly, it's complicated, it's exhausting, okay? So I'm in terms of what we are hoping to see once Muslim marriages are recognized and regulated, that all of that will fall away. So now women or disadvantaged parties in a relationship can access the courts or access relief that is available to everyone in the country, okay? Then in terms of what is Sharia, that's a loaded question, but I'm going to give you my understanding, and of course, my co-panelists will give you theirs. And the way I see it, because I sort of approach it from a very gender egalitarian perspective, right? So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in terms of what is Sharia, what is Islamic law, what is jurisprudence. And I like to explain it like this, if I can just use an example, that if you have a fountain, all right, a fountain that springs out all this nutritious water, whatever it is, and then you have a pathway that leads to the fountain, okay? The fountain is the Quran. The pathway that leads to that fountain is Sharia. So all the principles that come out of the Quran, the principles of equality, justice, dignity, all of those principles come out of the Quran, and that is what is Sharia, okay? Then we have fiqh, all right? Now those principles of the Sharia, obviously, are stock standard principles from the Quran, okay? Then you have the fiqh, which is the jurisprudence. This is now a contextual understanding of the Sharia, or the principles from the Quran, okay? And a contextual understanding of what lessons the Prophet, peace be upon him, has left for us. So the fiqh, or the jurisprudence, then, is contextual-based legislation and is not the Sharia. And often there's a misunderstanding around that. Jurisprudence or fiqh is applied in each community. So depending on what the demands are in that community or what the circumstances are, you're going to sort of look at the Sharia, look at the Quran, look at the principles that emanate from there, and you're going to apply it, okay? That will change, as I said, from generation to generation, country to country, suburb to suburb, right? And then you get Islamic law. Islamic law is legislation. So if you have a Muslim country, they're going to apply what they consider to be the jurisprudence at that time, and they're going to codify it. So that for me is what I understand to be Islamic law. So, and what we end up doing is we end up just sort of traversing and sort of misunderstanding and conflating these concepts. So if I had to give you an example then, and so I'm a fiduciary practitioner, right? So I often relate this to estate planning and inheritance laws, but today I'm going to use sort of Muslim marriage concepts. So if you had polygamy, let's take polygamy as a broad topic. At the time that the Arab society lived, when the Quran was revealed, at that time, women were just considered to be shackled. They had no rights, okay? Just like everywhere else in the world, and let's not mistake it, that was a situation of women at that time, okay? And it's not specific to Arab society. And men then would take women as their assets without any regard for them, and depending on their value, adopt them as their wives. And they could take up to 10, 20, 40 wives. It didn't matter. They lived as their concubines, okay? The Quran was revealed to regulate that society, to say, hey, this is a limitation. I'm giving you a limitation. You can only take up to 4 wives, but there are conditions there too, okay? So it didn't come in as an allowance, it came in as a limitation, and there were specific conditions to that limitation, that you can take up to 2, 3, or 4, but provided, and there's a whole lot of provisions. I'm not going to go into that, okay? So what's the ideal? The ideal is 1, okay? But the up to 4 came in as a regulation and as a limitation. If you consider contextually now, is it practical to have 4 wives where you are fulfilling all the conditions? Does it still comply with justice, dignity, equity, love, kindness, and all of those elements?
Romana,
Perhaps not.
hold that thought, because those
Yes.
are questions that Advocate Mwanawina is going to be asking you when he takes
fine.
over from you.
Okay, just to summarize then. So each society then would readapt their understanding of polygyny according to their contextual experiences. So you'll find some saying, no, actually, no, polygyny, we don't want to go down that route. Some would say, it's fine, it's fine for our society, okay? But that's how the laws are meant to adapt.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I hope that just gives you a sort of breakdown in terms of what the Sharia is, what is fiqh, which is jurisprudence, which is what we are talking about today. What we are talking about today is not Sharia. It's not Islamic law. It's fiqh, it's the jurisprudence, it's the application.
Application is Islamic law, as you referred to. So and this is very important, Romana. So that's why I'm glad that when you are correcting some of the narratives that are out there, and some of them are the misconceptions are formally being put out there by government. I have actually invited, I'm a former state law advisor, so I think that gives me a right to critique their work, because I've actually done it. Normally, they're obviously supposed to consult the various stakeholders, consult the various judicial councils, the men, the women, the various entities involved. But Advocate Mwanawina, he had a question to follow up.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin.
But after that, you can take it over.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin. Now, colleagues, to the panelists, we actually do require your help as far as understanding the richness of the culture and the religious practices behind the marriages that we are speaking about today. And I think that's one of the fundamental things that we might have skipped in our introduction, because if I was to be asked to explain a customary law marital process of maybe the Ndebele, I'll take you through some of the most important critical customary steps towards the conclusion of that particular marriage. Now, we have been talking about Islamic practices or Muslim practices, but we have not been given the pleasure of actually experiencing the cultural steps leading up to the conclusion of a marriage. And I think that's one thing that those who may have had hands-on experience should share with us. Those who have been in the litigation space, trying to get a particular relationship declared a marriage, you can take us through that. I think that appreciation is quite important, as equally as important as it is for us to understand the legal dynamics, the status of the bill. But I think the cultural steps and the practices are just as important. So it's an open-ended question to our colleagues and members of the panel to just take us through that. I think the audience would also appreciate knowing the rich background behind what we are talking about today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think anyone can be a taker in that narrative that Advocate Mwanawina has brought to the fore.
Camilla's speaking, but I think her mic's off.
So we can start
My
with,
mic's back on. It's a very, very loaded question. And I think if I were to answer that question, I'd be talking all day. So I'm going to break it down. I just need to understand before I answer the question who our audience is. My understanding is that our audience are law students within your law school.
that is correct. We have law students. I believe we might have a few staff members logged in as well. And Busisiwe, you may correct me. This event is recorded and will also be made accessible to members of the public, if I'm correct.
Absolutely, Avram.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Yes, the whole community. We try and make and bring law, as I said, bring law to the people.
Okay, so we've got a very rich history in South Africa, and I'm going to simplify my answer because there are many caveats and many complexities to this answer. So I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. But if I understand your question, it is what is the history? How have we evolved? And what is the cultural history of Islamic marriages over this period of time? Have I understood your question correctly?
That is correct. Your understanding is spot on. You may take it from there.
Okay, so as Rumana and Munir has mentioned, that Muslim marriages has never been recognized in South Africa. And Rumana has touched on certain ad hoc cases that we've had over the years. In particular, we've had the Hassan case of 2008, and we've had the Daniels decision of 2004. So you've had Muslim marriages, and a man and a woman would go to their religious leader, the imam of their mosque, and they would say, "We want to get married." And they would complete their marriage certificate, and they would then get a marriage certificate from the relevant imam to say that you are now married in terms of Islamic rights. And that has been the position for many years. Some years ago, the Department of Home Affairs started an initiative where they schooled and trained certain imams to be marriage officers. And it was a good step in the right direction, because what you had was a situation where people were getting married Islamically, but because the imam was also a marriage officer, their marriages were recognized. If I remember correctly, and maybe Rumana can comment, but I think only 12 passed.
Yes, and two women marriage officers are part of the MPL network that I belong to.
Yeah.
So we're very proud of that.
So it's a very small number in the entire South Africa, but it was a step in the right direction. Right. And but the biggest problem that we encountered was on death and divorce. Right. And so because Islamic marriages were not recognized, right, or they were recognized on an ad hoc basis through these various court cases, like I mentioned to you, Hassan, and the Hassan case and the Daniels case, they were only recognized in those limited instances. They were expanded over time, where spouses in terms of a Muslim marriage could approach a court in terms of a Rule 43 order. And they were recognized in instances where a spouse in a Muslim marriage who was also married civilly could approach a court for the payment of her dowry or her mahar if they entered into a Muslim marriage contract, and they could then give effect to a Muslim marriage contract. So I'm a family law and matrimonial practitioner. And so the people that knock on my door are the people usually A, getting married, or B, getting divorced, or C, they have now lost their husband and they need to claim in terms of the Interstate Succession Act and the Maintenance of Surviving Spouses Act. So we've sort of hurdled along the way, trying to put this piecemeal situation together. And like Rumana has said, we've drawn from different pieces of legislation to try and find the relief for our clients, which is often women and children, to try and find relief and protection for them without the Muslim marriages being recognized.
Yes.
Right. So these women and children wouldn't have automatic oversight from offices like the Office of the Family Advocate, etc. And so, and they often wouldn't have relief in terms of maintenance and proprietary consequences. So this is the history of where we come from. And when all these different bills, Muslim marriages, were circulated and out for comment, we hit a bit of a stone wall because we couldn't find consensus from all the different ulama.
Yes.
And like Rumana has said, there was a lot of enthusiasm when it came to election time, and there was a lot of energy put into trying to get this off the ground. And then after election time, it just slowly died. You know, so this is the sort of history we come from. And when the ConCourt made the decision, well, not only the ConCourt, but the High Court initially, then the Supreme Court of Appeal confirmed it, and then the Constitutional Court, it radically changed the position available to women and children, but it didn't set out how these changes were going to be regulated.
Yeah.
And so that's the big question, how they're going to be regulated. My personal view is that the private members bill is not necessarily the answer. I think that it should protect all women and all religious groups. Although the clock is ticking for the Muslim marriages because they have a timeline set by the Constitutional Court where the other religious groups don't have, there's no clock ticking for them.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Colleagues, may I kindly allow just two more comments before I add another layer to the question that I had asked? I think there's been a very good contribution that I would like to latch on. Rumana, Faisal?
Yeah.
Dr. Munir, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I can also just comment concerning the context within the South African framework, and more specifically the marriage officers. There is a bit more than 12. There was initially about 100 from the Western Cape, and they went around the country as well. I'm also currently one of the marriage officers for the Department of Home Affairs. One of the tricky issues we are sitting with is when you have two different marriages that are concluded. It's not one marriage. It is basically two marriages that has to be concluded. Firstly, it would be the Islamic marriage that is required in terms of the person's religion. That is where they go to the masjid, they have the offer, the acceptance, the witnesses, the dawah, and all of those things. That is first concluded. Thereafter, there's an additional marriage that is solemnized in terms of the Marriage Act, right? And that conditions must also then be met in terms of the civil marriage. Now, in the event of a divorce, what then happens is we first have to dissolve the Islamic marriage and later on dissolve the civil marriage. And this is what is required in terms of Section 5A of the Divorce Act. So the current position is not the best type of a position. If, for example, the piece of legislation, either in terms of a chapter in an omnibus act or a standalone legislation, it deals with the registration or basically automatic acceptance or basically the recognition of the Islamic marriage, then there will only be one marriage that is then dissolved at the time of the person having divorced or having passed on. And within that context, I believe the Department of Home Affairs, I received a message yesterday from the Muslim Judicial Council that tomorrow morning we'll be sitting in a meeting. I'm in Limpopo at the moment on a mediation here with the CRL, but I'll be joining in live via Zoom. They are also going to have another circular that they are going to publish I think by Thursday, probably the evening, where they will also now be looking at, as an interim measure, how they will be dealing with that constitutional court judgment. So yes, the Islamic marriages are still dealt with in terms of the Islamic law. It is done in the masajid and so forth. There's also the issue concerning the jurisprudence, the Shafi'i, the Hanafi, the Madahib, and so forth. But nonetheless, if the proposed legislation goes through and becomes Islamic law, then we have to adopt a certain opinion. And that has happened even in terms of the 2010 bill, where they have adopted an opinion where the divorce, for example, tafwid al-talaq, where the husband can delegate the right of divorce to the wife. So these are a few of the cultural complexities around this matter. Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, just to enrich the discussion further, two speakers so far have mentioned dowry. And I have very interesting questions. And of course, I'm juxtaposing this with other customary practices within South Africa. Who pays dowry in an Islamic marriage? What is the currency? And when I say what is the currency, I mean, in some African traditions, the currency is calculated in terms of cattle. And, maybe the families would then decide at the end of calculating the number of cattle, how much currency is allocated to one beast. And that's how they determine the currency. When is dowry paid? Does the absence of dowry invalidate the marriage? Can it be paid in installments? Do you need to register the installments with the National Credit Regulator? The last comment is just for fun. But please give us a bit of perspective as far as that process is concerned towards the conclusion of a valid union.
Yeah, if I could very quickly just give a comment on that, because I think my network is cut off at one. Concerning the dowry, in Islamic law, there's a difference between the dawah and the dowry. In Arabic, they refer to it as the mahar. The dowry generally within the customary law context is what is paid to the family, right? And they have it. Whereby in terms of Islamic law, it's not paid to the parents or to the family. It is basically a gift given to the prospective wife. So it doesn't have to be a cattle. It can be a sum of money. It could be a house. It could be paid immediately at the time of the marriage contract. It could be part paid at the time of contract. Later on, it could be paid off in the next few years. And various conditions can be put around that dowry. But my contribution will be that it is not for the family, but to the prospective wife, and I'm sure the other panelists will contribute accordingly as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Advocate, sorry, Romana, you could go ahead.
No, carry on. Please carry on.
Thank you, Romana. Romana, I actually wanted to perhaps touch on something that Romana had mentioned, because she clearly has many years of activism on this matter that I could see coming through in her discussion. Advocate, I just wanted to mention that I know that some people perhaps watching this might not be always happy that I might say what I need to say, but it was just something that was sitting in the back of my mind, listening to the discussion and listening to Romana earlier. Last night when I read part of the, just coming back to the latest bill, and I understand Romana's idea and positioning on the latest bill and where she sees it, then I can appreciate that. But just coming to the latest bill again and reading that last night, the section in the back that talks about the historic development starting from what I understand in 1987 and then coming upwards and that sort of thing. What I saw was that there are, in the private members bill, obviously they're speaking about the registration of Muslim marriages, the solemnization in accordance with the tenets of Islam in terms of the dowry, the two witnesses, and the wali, or what we call the legal guardian, for example, and then also the statutory age of 18 years old, I think, which is in line with the Children's Act also, for example. But what I feel at times is that the stifling also might also be an internal strife at times, because if we look at the different schools of thought within Islamic law and jurisprudence, for example, the Shafi madhab, for example, says that, and Dr. Munir, if I could maybe engage you on that, would mean that the legal guardian has to be present, for example. Where the other jurists hold that consent can, if the consent is unduly withheld, then there is a recourse for the female to approach a body like the Muslim Judicial Council, for example, for such consent. However, the comment I wanted to make is that at times, I know that we might get frustrated with the various legal processes and the state and everybody else, but at times, we as Muslims also need to find some space of reconciliation, and the approach that we will take, understanding the fact that we do have different schools of thought. And within the context of today, I believe that it's not only the schools of thought, but there are different groups of people with different ideas, but it's about finding that space. And I'm just hoping through discussions like this, that we perhaps will start closing those gaps.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Colleagues, you may go ahead. Romana, you wanted to make a contribution?
Yes, I just wanted to talk about the mahar and the dawah,
Okay.
and the distinction. Sheikh Munir clearly drew the distinction between dawah and dowry, and I think that's something that's very important to understand in this context. Your mahar or dawah can take the form of anything. It's a negotiated, it's something that is negotiated, and I want to just draw everyone's attention to the fact that in Islamic law, the nikah functions as a covenant, okay? And we call that covenant mithaqun ghalidun, okay? So it's a contract of agreement of mutuality. And there has to be this process of negotiation. So in essence, Islamic marriages it begin on the basis that there has to be a prenuptial agreement, a contract, an agreement which deals not only with the patrimonial consequences like our antenuptial contracts do, but with the day-to-day management of the marriage as well. So it would deal with mahar. What form would that mahar take? I mean, there were women back in the day who would say the mahar they want is for their husband to commit a chapter of the Quran by heart. That is what, because it has to be something of value to the parties, okay? And it's not necessarily just a little bit of money. It has to be something that is of value, especially to the woman. And that's why in this whole move to encourage people who are entering into marriages to enter to enter into prenuptial agreements. It's something that the woman has to negotiate, because remember, she is giving exclusive and understand, she's giving exclusive sexual access to herself in exchange in this marriage. So she must be very, very prudent in terms of what she's asking for. That's the right that she is given in terms of the Islamic laws. Okay, it's her right to negotiate. And yes, it can be deferred, or it can be for immediate payment, and it does become a liability against the estate of the husband. Okay.
All right.
And in terms of the further formalities, I mean, just in coming back to that negotiated agreement, besides the mahr, very often issues such as what is divorce, or which school of thought we're going to abide by to determine how a marriage is regulated. How are we going to deal with disputes? What does talaq mean? Does talaq mean uttering talaq 3 times, or does it mean once? You know, how would the maintenance or nafaqah work? How do we determine who's going to be the primary nurturer and who's going to be the primary income earner in that relationship? And very importantly, the wife at that point, or the prospective wife, has the right to put in a condition that if the husband chooses to take on a subsequent spouse, she has the right to extricate herself from that marriage. Now, if that condition is not put in at inception, then the default position applies, where the husband then has the right, according to jurisprudential courts, to subsequent relationships, and she loses that. Okay, so the prenuptial agreement is a very, very critical document to that nikah. Okay, the nikah formality obviously takes place, and then ideally the relationship is managed or sort of proceeds on the basis of the in principle agreements of that prenuptial agreement. And of course, I would then challenge that if Muslim marriages are based on prenuptial agreements, they can determine then what the property consequences ought to be. It doesn't have to be a sort of ANC or antenuptial contract sort of solution. You know, it can be what we would in South Africa apply a community of property solution. I just wanted to comment in terms of the Muslim marriage officers. Yes, Sheikh Munir was right, and apologies, Camilla. There were quite a few marriage officers, but very proudly as the MPL network, we have 2 who are part of that. But in our analysis, we've just found that what it's done, it hasn't quite gone to provide relief, because it's just reducing the 2-step process of having to do a nikah and then a subsequent civil marriage, just reduce that 2-step process into one sort of venue. So now you have one marriage officer who will be able to do both procedures for you in one, but it still does not give recognition and dignity to religious and Muslim marriages. If our constitution gives recognition to the practice of our religious faith, and on that basis, surely we should not have to be subjected to this double-step process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Those were very insightful comments. I do have a few follow-up questions, but I had noted that Camilla, at some point you wanted to come on.
It's okay. I wanted to comment on something that Munir had said, but it's so long ago now.
Right. But not a problem.
So I'll reserve my comment for a further question.
All right. No, thank you very much. Colleagues, I would like us to move to a different question in relation to our discussion for today, and it relates to some of the comments that we have actually seen in some of the judgments in relation to the topic today about the women and children needing protection from violence, abuse, conditions that are not good enough for human dignity and equality. And I think some of that is also reflected in paragraph 18 to 19 of the decision that led to some of the topics that we are discussing today. Women's Legal Center Trust versus President of the Republic of South Africa, decided in 2022. And I would like to hear your views as far as violence in marriages, we know that that is a problem definitely in South Africa. And Rumana, if I may borrow some of your words, you indicated a woman giving exclusive sexual access. And how do we reconcile the views associated with violence in marriages, and not only Muslim marriages, but marriages generally in South Africa and intimate relationships in South Africa? How do we reconcile what the Constitution requires and what we would also love to implement as far as our marital practices are concerned? Are there mechanisms within the religious customary practices that ensure the protection of women and children? What are your views on that generally, colleagues?
Okay. So the current legislation in South Africa allows for, in the case of domestic violence, a woman or a mother on behalf of her children can approach the domestic violence court. Many of the misconceptions of Muslim marriages is that, and that I've found in practice, is that there's a lot of males out there that are of the view that if a woman, when she signs that contract that Rumana has referred to, she's got to abide by any request at any given time, and if she doesn't, that often results in domestic violence. It's just one of the reasons, and the relief, and the only relief that she can approach, that she has at her disposal, is going to the criminal courts and going to the domestic violence courts. But that's been problematic because prior to June and prior to the Concord decision, a lot of men has raised the issue that they're not married. But it's still a domestic relationship. They are still living together. They are still children. It's but these are the challenges that we face. And I don't think that with the Concord decision or with a piece of legislation, be it the recognition of Muslim marriages or the Single Marriage Act or the Omnibus, none of that is going to make that problem go away. Because there are misconceptions, and not just in Muslim marriages, in all marriages.
Absolutely.
But there are pieces of legislation in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, in terms of the Domestic Violence Act, that these pieces of legislation are available to all women and children to provide them with adequate protection. It doesn't always work as well as it should, but those are the pieces of legislation available.
Thank you very much. Rumana?
I think that there's a perception that, or there's an association with Islam and inequality. Okay. When it comes to women and gender issues. But when I spoke about the example, or when I broke down earlier on the concepts of Sharia, fiqh, state law, okay, a lot of those issues arise as a consequence of Muslims not applying the rules and leaning on a very sort of misogynistic interpretation of the Quran and its principles. So, for example, there's a particular chapter that speaks about, what would happen if there's a dispute in a relationship, and very often that is used to justify domestic violence in Muslim marriages. And yet, if one had to interpret the language used in that particular verse, it's far from that, okay? if Islam is about, or if the Quran, and I'm going to say, if the Quran is about equality, dignity, mercy, then domestic violence has no place to play. It's supposed to be a relationship of mutual understanding and love and care. And as much as, yes, I mentioned sexual access, but remember, in all marital relationships, irrespective of whether it's a Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, or even any of the customary marriages, generally the norm is that a woman and a woman would give her exclusive access to her husband. Okay, polygyny works very differently in terms of how men access that relationship or give access to themselves. Okay, so I don't think that's anything unusual. I think that is more or less the norm. Polyandry obviously would have a different spin. Okay, but I just think that there's a lot of negative media out there on gender, Islam, and abuse, and I think that this is supported by, because as part of the Muslim community, unfortunately, those who interpret the Quran very patriarchal, misogynistic way interpret certain concepts to justify it. And for those lobbying against more egalitarian interpretations and gender-balanced interpretation of the Quran, we don't see that. We don't see that justification.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that context. Faisal, please come on.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo a little bit of what Rumana is saying. From the perspective that, from an equality perspective and point of view, the misconceptions about Muslims and marriages is wide out there in terms of the interpretations of the media. And I'm not going to go to what type of media, but yes, the media plays a role in that misinterpretation and peddling off particular stories and narratives that might benefit itself in different forms. But from an equality perspective, there is no inequality in terms of Sharia, but there is a higher responsibility on the husband to provide. And this is where the husband might gain the upper hand at times. And like Rumana had said, it's their own interpretation, their own misogynistic interpretation of that. The Sharia makes the male in the Muslim community they're more active in terms of the protection and maintenance of females. The Quran itself in Surah An-Nisa, and Surah An-Nisa is one of the chapters, if I can put it to you that way, says that men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend for maintenance from their wealth. And this sometimes would be interpreted that the reason why men is in charge, if some people want to say that way, is because of maintenance they have towards his spouse and therefore understood as the higher authority. There is something that I just want to quickly bring in conclusion of this point from my point of view, is that oral tradition or prophetic tradition, within Islam in terms of the hadith, we call that the hadith, which is the prophetic tradition. And Ibn Majah being one of those authorities, I had narrated that the best of you is the one who is best to his wife. So these are not the tenets that are being communicated within the narrative of Islam. The ones that suit a particular agenda might be the ones that is peddled off. One of the greatest expositions of Allah or God is the divinity of creation of a spouse, the system of procreation itself. I think that's a different issue. But some relationships can only be nurtured with love. Other relationships needed compassion and loyalty. And encapsulating all of that, Allah says in the Quran, and of the signs of his supremacy is that he has created for you spouses from your own kind so that you may attain tranquility from there. He has also created between you, the spouses, love and compassion. Indeed, in these there are signs for you who wish to ponder. And from that, we see from a Quranic injunction that our direction and our orders and instruction is very different to that which is being purported outside.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very insightful. And, you know, we kind of then gravitated towards a topic, a second theme before we close off today's discussion, and that relates to the stereotypes and, you know, stereotypes associated with certain cultural or religious practices. And you have the opportunity, colleagues, you've already mentioned the stereotype around violence and male domination. But I would like to just open it up and give you the opportunity to correct other stereotypes that may be peddled by the media or the public around the Muslim or Islamic marriages. What would you, off the cuff, like to correct? And Faisal, your contribution as far as the interpretation that you've quoted there is one way to set the record straight. I do not know if the other panelists would like to make contributions in that direction as well. Camilla, you are muted. I can see you're speaking. All right, still muted. Rabada, you had unmuted as well.
I would have liked to have heard Camilla's point first.
Okay.
Stereotypes, just in terms of the gender role, I'm hoping that this discussion passes on the message that there's a lot more than what one sees in the media, in mainstream media, especially around gender equality, equity, justice, you know, and more particularly around Muslim marriages. I think that we must bear in mind that in South Africa in particular, during the former days of apartheid, we had access to scholars coming from the Indo-Pak regions. And those scholars were, I mean, by nature of their culture, they were far more conservative in their approach and very much more patriarchal. And they brought their interpretation to South Africa. Post-94, when things started opening up, and we were more exposed to other forms of thinking, I think it really changed the landscape. For me as a student growing up in the 90s at varsity and being exposed to scholars, gender justice scholars like Dr. Amina Wadud and other scholars in her ilk, just sort of gave me as a woman, gave me a sense of dignity within my religion that I found very challenging up until that point. Because of the teachings in our Islamic schools or Muslim schools, because of what traditionally we were exposed to. And remember, in Muslim communities, especially in KZN and Gauteng, there isn't a space for women to attend the masjids or the mosques. And so the education at that level, the exposure is sort of very limited. And I'm talking about back in the day. Now with access to, you know, I think access to education is limitless. And we begin to learn about other scholars who interpret what we used to take for granted, interpreting those principles in such different and more egalitarian ways.
Yes.
So yeah, I think when one is studying Islam or studying the laws, one needs to consider that there are a lot of other voices. And sometimes, like everything in life, the voices that are given the biggest microphones are given those microphones not because they have greater value to add, but sometimes because there's bigger money behind that, you know, yeah. Or there are political intonations around that. So one must bear that in mind, that there's a lot more out there than just what you see on the face of it.
Thank you very much. Camilla?
Maybe I can add some final points. I take it that Rumana has grown up in KZN. I grew up in the Western Cape, and I'll agree with her that I may have had more opportunities to engage and participate in training at the various mosques or masjids. And maybe we're more laid back in the Western Cape than in KZN. But the idea of stereotypes in I think often when you watch movies, the Muslim man is the bloodthirsty dude with the long beard, with coming to chop your hand off for murdering someone or stealing or whatever the case may be. I mean, those are the stereotypes out there in the news. But when I started practicing law, the scary part is that those stereotypes exist. Those stereotypes with that very narrow understanding of Islam, because Islam is not about hate and killing. Islam is about love and respect and care. And so when people grow up with a very limited understanding of their deen or their religion, they perpetuate what they've seen and grow and how they were raised. And this just passes on from one generation to the next. And what we need to do to change this is education, educating our children, educating our women, so that they have a proper understanding of what Islam means and what your rights and responsibilities are in terms of Islam.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Faisal, I've noted your hand. I'm going to come to you very soon. But what I'm gathering, as far as consensus and contributions that we have received so far from Camilla and Rumana, is that there is an urgent need to give opportunities to, I would say, an alternative voice, and not really a voice that is backed up by more money or power, but give space for various interpretations and the development of various more legitimate interpretations and not necessarily powerful interpretations. Am I correct? Yes, I can see both of you.
Sorry, we're both nodding in agreement.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Faisal, your hand was up as well.
Thank you, Advocate. I don't know why I'm feeling like I'm in class at the moment, seeing you on that side, but just you know, on the stereotyping side, and I've just got this internal passion for trying to correct misconceptions about things, because I understand as a media practitioner
Faisal,
how the
apologies. If I may just ask you to pause. I know Kevin is going to get off the platform soon. If we could just give him an opportunity to say goodbye to us before you continue. Yes, Kevin? You are still muted.
I don't know if you can see me?
Yes, we can see you now.
Oh, yes. Okay, no, thank you very much. I just don't want to derail the conversation. The momentum and the speed is picking up so beautifully, and you know, I have to exit shortly, but I'm so delighted by the success of the conversation in terms of bringing out even our own misconceptions and clarifying all the legal and non-legal issues concerning Muslim marriages and the Muslim community. So, and that's what we want. And I'm eternally grateful to all our esteemed panelists. But this doesn't end the conversation. Please continue. I know it's getting very exciting, and thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, Kevin. Please do have a lovely afternoon.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. We unfortunately have lost an excellent co-host at this stage, but I'll try and finish up on his behalf. Faisal, you were on the microphone.
Yes, thank you, Advocate. The part that I wanted to touch on was the aspect of this continual stereotyping and misconceptions that continue in society, not only pertaining to marriages, and yes, lots around Muslim marriages, but also in terms of Islam as a whole. So I think these platforms does afford some opportunity to put that down, which might be the truth. So, for example, I think that many people don't know that the Quran encourages the husband to give the wife a gift at the time of the divorce. Many people are not aware of that. And then pertaining, for example, something that might be totally misconstrued is the waiting period, or that which we consider the iddah period, which is the waiting period at the end. And many people don't realize that the Quran here says that, O Prophet, instruct the believers, when you intend to divorce women, then divorce them with concern for their waiting period and count it accurately. Do not force them out of their homes, nor should they leave unless they commit a blatant misconduct. Then when they have almost reached the end of their waiting period, either retain them honorably or separate with them honorably, and call two of your reliable men to witness either way, and let the witness bear true testimony for the sake of Allah or God. So I just wanted to just extract that little piece out. And the reason for that was that these misconceptions that we just get divorced and just throw people out to do things, but the instruction and the injunction is totally something else. And picking up on a little bit on just what our colleague from Harold G. Attorneys had mentioned, is that I think that the problem is that the education about what the Islamic tenets is and what Muslim culture is, instead of the ideas peddled out there, is a matter that needs to be looked at. And the fact that the acceptance for and the respect of the values enshrined in the Constitution itself, if we as South Africans accept and imbibe the values in the Constitution, then that means we should have no disregard or disrespect for the values of any other South African, despite which religion they might come from or culture or belief.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Faisal. Colleagues, I have been informed that our time is up as far as this particular webinar is concerned. I would like to express our sincere appreciation of the contributions and the time that you have taken to actually join us. And this goes to all the panelists and attendees. I can see the list of attendees. I have no doubt that you have questions or comments that you would also like to make. If I may kindly ask that you maybe transmit those questions through our events management team. I'm sure their details will be accessible on the social media platform, and we will gladly transmit those questions and comments to the panelists, and we'll make sure that the responses are also conveyed back to you. And we've introduced our panelists in such a way that you can actually find them on LinkedIn as well. I've noticed most of them have law firms running, so you are more than free to contact them in that capacity as well. Any final comments, Romana? I could tell from your body language that there might be one more comment coming from your side.
I particularly thought your question on whether marriage regimes, Muslim marriage regimes, operate side by side or in compliance with the Constitution was interesting.
Yes.
To raise the point that we are a Muslim minority in the country. That is our reality. I often find it quite amusing that very often our Muslim community believe that we shouldn't abide by that Islamic law is the be all and end all. And I think the reality we need to face is that we are a Muslim minority. We have a brilliant constitution that allows us to practice our faith. And I'm by no means saying that our constitution supersedes our religious belief. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I think that we also need to remind ourselves that the Quran is very specific when it says that, and this is somewhere in chapter 4, something to the effect that those who believe in God and believe in the messenger also believe in the authority over you. And as a Muslim minority in this community, in the community of South Africa, we are obliged by that belief system to follow the rules of the land. And I don't see any incongruence between the Constitution and the Quran in terms of the principles that we are meant to follow. And yeah. So.
Absolutely. Faisal, I must indicate, Faisal is one of my students. So I assume if I'm correct, we have class late this afternoon, Faisal, so please don't miss class.
I do have an excuse today.
Colleagues, thank you very much. This was definitely enriching and insightful. We really appreciate the contributions. And our events management team will be in contact with you in the future once a recording of this session is available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
For
much.
having us, for this
Thank you very much.
opportunity. It's been extremely humbling. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right, cheers, bye-bye.